And now while you're going, I'm not going, I'm not stopping. No. We've got to have lunch, and I need to hint that we're also in a third world country. The water stopped running, so if you wonder why there's nothing coming out the bathroom, the water stopped running, the thing blew up the road. But I just want to quickly, before we break for lunch, and Mark is here the entire 2 days, and there's a big augmented reality, introduce a dear friend of mine, Jason Curtis, who interviewed Mark, who helped me to write all the press releases and that about music exchange and what we were doing. A couple of questions. Jason's going to pose one, and I think let's open it up into the audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe to close off...
Because I won't stop talking.
No. To close off on Sunday, I think we're going to get Mark back up for more war stories. So you know now what he's done, so start diving and start writing. And also research about augmented reality.
I haven't told you about the NWA case, because that was a landmark.
Okay, you can end that before we go for lunch. We'll do that.
Come on.
Okay, do that.
No.
2 days. You're for 2 days.
You asked me the question, so... Yeah.
Ask him the one about NWA.
Yeah, first question.
Okay, sorry. Nick and I can speak for half an hour and then he can carry on for another hour.
We realise that you guys have been sitting here for 2.5 hours, so congratulations. But yeah, we would like to give you a break. But no, Mark, just from my side, I mean, obviously you were working at Ireland at a time when everything changed. The industry was kind of clawing on, holding on for dear life to what it had. The internet arrived in your tenure. And would you say, I mean, this is not the question, but obviously, you know, you were arrogant, you were large, and so you believed somehow, a bit like retail, that you could beat this thing, or that you would retain the control that you did. And then, as I say, digital happened, MP3 happened. We've spoken about this, the invention of the dreaded MP3. But then, when the industry very late realized that they couldn't beat this thing, that the deals that were then done with the likes of Steve Jobs, the ones that were done with the Spotifys, were arguably really bad deals for the artists.
They were bad for everybody.
Yeah.
Bad for everybody. They were bad for the public.
Yeah.
Because of the net effect of what happened to music, because of it.
Yeah.
You know. But I'll take you back a bit on that. I've always been somebody obsessed with technology. No coincidence that I'm going to lead you through a conversation on augmented reality tomorrow. I bought personally with my own credit card u2.com, u2.co.uk, islandrecords.com, island.co.uk in 1984, before Berners-Lee launched the World Wide Web as a graphical interface, because I could see it coming, I could smell it coming. And I had a particular friend, Willie Henschel, who is a songwriter who wrote I've Been Thinking About You for London Beat, huge hit all over the world, #1 in America. And Willie in particular is a total technology obsessed. He's one of my best pals, and he talked me through where the internet was going. And so in 1995, I gifted the URLs to U2 and to the company. And I remember Paul McGuinness saying, I normally get a fucking hamper at Christmas. What's this piece of paper? And that was the certificate handing over U2.com to him.
He's like, do you realise what that's worth
exactly.
in money?
But in 1995, I built island.co.uk, which is acknowledged to be the first ever major label website. And I really felt this was coming, and I built a website. In the next year, I put our deep catalogue on sale, and I made a deliberate choice that I would put, because people still wanted Fotheringay's first album, they just couldn't get it. Yeah. If you looked at any Tower Records or any HMV in the UK, maybe they stocked 30,000 albums. We had 18,000 albums in our own catalogue. So how would ever our deep catalogue ever get penetration in a record store unless it happens to be a mega store on Oxford Street? So I put those on sale. Brian McLaughlin, the managing director of HMV, realised that I was competing with him, and he pulled all of Universal's stock. He pulled all of Universal's new releases, all of our most important new talent, not just mine, Mercury, A&M, all of those ones, pulled it off the shelves and said, we're not selling it because you're now a competitive retailer. And luckily, I'd had the foresight to write to him. He didn't remember that I'd written to him saying, this is what I'm considering doing, do I have your blessing? And he had given it to his head of operations, the letter, and his head of operations had written back saying, yeah, go ahead. It's a fucking letter to show him, to say that you've given me permission. So it was all fixed. But anyway, point being was that I saw it coming. And I remember trying to tell the chairman at the time, Roger Ames, of how the internet was going to change the world and trying to proselytise about it. And we used to have managing directors meetings every month where all of the UK managing directors were to get together. And I remember Roger, there was a whiteboard behind him, and I made my speech about, this is going to change the world, it's going to change the world. And he just wrote, fuck the internet, and sat down and said, don't ever mention it again.
Yeah, but that
for him.
and that
5 years later, he's the chairman of AOL Time Warner.
So basically, the record industry, broadly speaking, cannibalized and killed itself.
Well, I'm going to take you a bit further because Alan Levy did realise he was the head of Polygram at that time. He did realise that something was up and something was changing, and he did realise that I was really passionate about it. So he gave me $1 million to spend with McKinsey, the consulting firm, to come up with a solution to the internet for Polygram. And we
fight it. To fight
no,
it.
not to fight it. No.
Right, to understand it.
To understand it and come up with a solution. What are we going to do about it?
As a business.
So we travelled the world and we met with Steve Jobs, and we went to Japan and we met with the head of Sony. I can't remember his name. We met Nicholas Negroponte, the head of MIT. We met the world's leading authorities on technology. And before the iPhone, we're MP3s in those days. We started out down a cul-de-sac thinking that what we needed to do was create our own platform and own our own digital technology, our own envelope, effectively, proprietary. And then halfway through, having talked to these great luminaries, we changed our tack. And what we decided was that we needed to create an open platform for the entire music industry. The only way to get rid of regulation is that you all set your own prices, so that there's no ubiquity about pricing. You set your own prices, and you have your own corner of it, but it's one technology. It's MP4 or whatever the fuck it is. And this is literally what happened. So we came to that conclusion, we wrote the report, we were invited to New York to present the report to the board of Polygram. I went to that meeting in New York, and I sat at the table, and it was nearly my board meeting for Polygram, and it was nearly my bit to say, this is what the future of the music industry is, and it was an amazing report, and it effectively predicted iTunes, is what it was doing. And we sat there, and a secretary walked into the room with a folded piece of paper and gave it to Alan Levy. And Alan Levy opened it up, and he went, and he folded it, and he slid it across to David Munns, who was the deputy chairman, who opened it and he went, closed it, slid it to Roger Ames, who was my boss, the chairman of the UK, who went, fuck! And that was the announcement that in half an hour's time, we, Philips, are selling you, Polygram, to Universal. And they never heard my report. Wow. That the meeting closed then in chaos, and that was the end of $1 million, amazing meetings, and a prediction that we should create iTunes. And in fact, the music industry then abdicated responsibility to Apple for pricing. We, when you're releasing a U2 record, you know you've got a premiere. It's cost millions to make the record. You want to sell it at a premium price, And when you've got a newbie, you want to give it a low price to be able to allow a public to discover it for themselves without too much risk. But suddenly we were forced to sell our Trabants at the same price as our Ferraris. And we lost control of pricing at that particular moment, which was the one thing that the McKinsey study was trying to avoid, was losing control of pricing. and at the same time we lost control of piracy.
And the same applies to catalogue, which obviously is a very topical theme in the world, has been for the last couple of years, where obviously artists and bands are selling out their catalogues to venture capitalist businesses for huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
And in the UK, back in the 70s, 80s certainly, it was a very sophisticated business where U2 would bring out a new album and it was wrapped in a certain way, but then their entire catalogue was all around it. And guess
Absolutely.
what? That catalogue was £9–10, where the new album, Superstar 15,
13,
60, or whatever it
14,
was.
yeah.
And you were probably moving more catalogue than you were of the new album.
Of course.
And what was the margin on the catalogue? Almost 100%.
Yes.
So, again, that model is now fundamentally broken, and I think
Yeah.
that's what hurts so many artists and so many creators,
Yeah.
because, what do they call it? Price parity.
Yes.
But we could go on for days, and I realise the time. Any questions for Mark that you
But
have?
there's huge issues around what you've just said, Jason. Around
Should we take it outside?
around deep catalogue having revived.
Oh, so the
careers
positives.
of
Yeah, and we could, again, part of the McKinsey study fed back to my 1985 experience of putting Fotheringay and Nick Drake's catalogue back into, we could see that there was an appetite for stuff that was long buried and long gone, or thought of as being long buried and long gone. And there was an appetite for it. And so the whole point of the McKinsey study is that everything could be digitized. We could end up with 100 million tracks, which of course is what we've now got,
The value, sorry, to not be misunderstood, it's a case of the value of catalogue was understood in the 80s and 90s, most particularly by Universal, who understood not to just trade on the new and to celebrate the legacy, because whether I'm coming in on album 4 or 5 and I go, I didn't realize there were 3 albums before, and that was probably one of the key reasons why they did it. But also that catalogue, all of the money that was spent, the marketing, the distribution, all of the initial upfront costs,
it was all recouped.
always recouped
Yeah.
a long time ago. So you wanted that, the artist wanted that, and well, certainly the labels do.
And again, to be really honest about running Island Records, to be able to invest in Courtney Pine or Babamal or Salif Keita or Talvin Singh or any of these wonderful, groundbreaking artists, we knew, and this is a real figure, is that every month I knew £600,000 was coming in from the catalogue. That had all been recouped, as you say. So we knew £600,000 were coming. That could keep the lights on. That we knew we could pay the salaries, pay the studio, pay everything else,
and
then have a bit
years.
left over to develop the new artists coming in. But that's very difficult if you're an independent label and you don't have £600,000 coming in every month. It's tough to be in that place.
I wanted to throw in a question that we were pontificating in the car.
Driving here, you've signed so many acts and that. What was the defining thing that you looked at, and has that fundamentally changed?
No, it's character. Again, it's character. It's very difficult to describe. Taste is unique. I remember winning the Mercury Music Prize with Talvin Singh, who made the most amazing, beautiful album, which was terribly called OK.
Yes.
And I A&R'd that, and I made that. And I worked with the most awesome manager, Jeff Travis, who managed the Cranberries and Pulp for me. And he's one of the leading, Rough Trade is his record label. He flew at me for winning because his taste didn't cover Talvin Singh. He was angry with me. My friend was angry with me because something he didn't like had won the Mercury Music Prize, But point being is that taste is different. And when I signed Pulp, I remember I went to the Nanking Chinese restaurant on King Street in Chiswick, and I met with Jarvis, and I remember what he was wearing. He was wearing a corduroy jacket like a chemistry teacher. He was 31 years old. He was older than me, and he was wearing mustard corduroy trousers, but they were too short. They came up to about here, and his socks and his shoes were showing. But he was such a fucking character, and he was so enigmatic that I decided I really wanted to sign him. And he was brought in by one of my junior A&R team, and I really, really liked him. I went back to the label and said that I was going to sign him. And my head of talent, who was really important, Nick Angel, who was my head of A&R, said, over my dead body. He's too old, he's past it, he's done, he's had 4 records out on Fire Records, nothing has caught fire on Fire Records. If you sign him, I'm resigning. And I thought, why am I doing? What's this job about? And I said, Nick, I don't want you to go, but I'm signing him. You know, and Nick didn't go. But point being was that Nick actually divided the company. So there were a lot of people in the company that didn't want to work on Pulp. And by the time we got to the 3rd album, and Common People had been this huge, huge record, and he'd had this huge moment where he'd effectively gone on stage and destroyed Michael Jackson at the Brits, and really caused the beginning of the undermining of Michael Jackson's public persona. Jarvis was huge. We had this incredible celebratory lunch at Nobu in London, where there was 12 of us around the table. Unfortunately, I was paying. And around that table of 12, there were only 2 Island employees, me and Claire Britt, the head of marketing, because everybody else had kind of distanced themselves. When Nick said, we're not signing Pulp, promotion department didn't really want to get involved, so we got an indie. Press department didn't want to get involved because they didn't want to fight, so we got an indie. So round the table was Pulp and a bunch of indies. You know, and so it's an interesting game, the music industry. It's because taste is not everything I sign is you're going to like, or you know, I play you Common People and you're going to be thinking, what the fuck's he playing this for? You know, I understand that because taste draws us together and separates us at the same time. You know, and so to go back to your question, Martin, it was always character that I was interested in. Presence. And I'll go to signing PJ Harvey. PJ Harvey is not the most important or biggest artist in the world. She is a very alternative auteur, female rock star, effectively. But I put her there with Bjork. I put her there with Kate Bush. You know, she's high art, and really, really interesting. When I saw PJ, I went to see her play in a tiny little seaside town called Bridport, where she lived, and she was 16 years old, and she was so shy that she played a guitar looking down at the ground and never looked at the audience once. But there was something just so magical about her, and about the rawness and the sensitivity in the songs, that it was impossible not to sign her.
Mark, I think, sorry.
And I was about to say, the only competition there was again 4AD Records.
Yes.
And I'm going to just give you a little story about signing PJ. She was terrified of signing to Island because we were a major label, and she was so independently minded that she came to my office and we had the contract ready to sign, but she just couldn't pick up the pen. She couldn't do it. And my office was, the Island Records building was an old laundry, and my office was the gaffer's office, the boss's office, looking down on where all the laundries would have been. So we called it the war room, and that's where promotion, marketing, everyone sat plotting out their careers, and I'd be looking down on the war room in my lofty eyrie. And Polly's in there with me, and in walks Julian Cope from the Teardrop Explodes, and he's one of our artists. And he is wearing a blue and white stripy top and the bottom half of a comedy dog outfit, complete with tail and feet. Fur. And Polly's never met Julian. And I said, I can tell you're really having trouble. And I've just made a great record with Julian Cope.
Yes, that's right.
And he was very proud of that record. And I said, go and talk to Julian about what freedom we'll give you and what choices you'll be allowed to make on your own. And she thought, okay, and she got up and she left and she went down and she tapped Julian on the shoulder, his tail whacked as he turned around. And they went off to, it was called the Ritz Cafe, which was again on King Street. And they went off and they had a cup of coffee, and she came back, picked up the pen, signed the contract. And that's, I just thought it was a lovely story.
It's a lovely story, but I think throughout this session, and thank you so much for delivering what you haven't shared with us all today. But I think, you know, with reference to Martin's point and also in reference to the journey of your career. Chris saw something in you. You've seen something in tens, if not hundreds, of artists, and then you've had the power, you've been in the position to be able to influence and grow those careers. So I think ultimately you see, you hear things, and if you believe in it fundamentally, and yes, there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of faith, but also blind faith. But passion, ultimately passion, and I think if there was a golden thread to everything that you've done in your life to here, I would say that is it.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you
so much.
I'll give you just one tiny little
Go.
And it's about the flight over here. So I'm a big playlist man. I make playlists all the time, but I have a bucket list for things that I really like, and I just collect. I hear it on Radio 6. So I Shazam it. I put it in my playlist and I forget it. I hit a track on the way over here, which is signed to Domino Records, fantastic independent label. Wilma Archer is the name of the artist. I hit that track when I was on the flight. I listened to it 7 times in a row because it hit me. It just was original, fucking different, and how rare it is to come across something where it emotionally resonates with me, but then was so different to everything else that's out there. And that's the Bob Marley quote. The great thing about music is when it hits, you feel no pain.
Yes.
You know? And that track stopped my pain,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
couldn't stop listening
That's
to
the
it.
power of
Going back,
music.
the power of music. But it was that obsession that I used to have when I was listening to demos and falling in love with artists. And you have to fall in love with them, and that goes right back to that original Roaring Boys authenticity. Chris Blackwell saying, "You've got to love it."
Yeah. Otherwise, you will be caught out.
You caught out.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.